Hello, everyone. My name is Maureen McDowell. I am the founder and executive director of Keep St. Pete Lit. We are a literary art organization based out of St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is Typewriter Talks, episode 8. And today we have Paul Wilborn with us. And the reason we decided to start doing Typewriter Talks is kind of our way to get inside of writers' brains and see what makes them tick. And also for, our writing students and to see there's not one right way to be a writer because everybody has a different process. So Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for including me. I'm really honored to be here. It's great.
So tell us what you're working on right now.
Just a couple of projects. The shutdown has at least kind of helped me in some ways. We were doing a gold medal new edition of my Cigar City book, and we got that edited and completed, and that's going off to the formatter. So we have a new edition of that book because it won the gold medal in the Florida Book Awards this 2019.
Congratulations again.
Thank you. I couldn't go they canceled the award ceremony, but we're putting the award on the book. And I finished and got back from both my editors a novel, my first novel.
Exciting. So yeah. Cigar City is short stories, correct?
Right.
And what was the inspiration behind that?
I was in Ybor City as a young reporter in the 1980s, and Ybor, like the East Village, was sort of an arts ghetto. All the Latin folks, most of them weren't living there anymore, and artists moved in, and a lot of famous artists had also chosen to be in that scene. So it was a real scene, and we threw parties and had auctions, and people made art and they made love and they did crazy stuff. And for about 10 years, it was just a magical time. And I think it's magical too, because we were all in our early 20s and everything's kind of magical then. So the guy who had been the real guru of that was Bud Lee, who's a wonderful photographer. And he died. He was older than most of us, and he had a stroke a few years ago and died. And his work was out there, and David Audette, my friend who's a great photographer, was sharing some of that work and his work too. And I felt like it was a story that needed to be told, and it was a period of Ybor that no one had ever really written about. So the story sort of came to my head, and over the course of 2 years, I wrote them.
That's really, I grew up going dancing in Ybor City, so it's your time was a little bit before mine. Mine was the early 90s, so you were in the 80s, but those parties and those events that led to Guavaween, correct? So yeah. you were pretty much the placemakers in a lot of ways for the art scene in that community. And even it really ran into the mid 90s too. There were a lot of cool stuff that happened. Yeah.
And I was around there, but not quite as heavily as I was in the 80s when we started parties and thousands of people would show up. And I was on the original committee for Guavaween to raise money for a theater company of all things. So
cool.
So anyway, it was fun, and it's gotten a lot of positive reaction from folks who were there. And also, I think it really appeals to an audience of 20-somethings who can sort of see that lifestyle, in their lives today.
So your main job, or day job, we should say, is the executive director of the Palladium Theater in St. Petersburg. And then you also have a cabaret act with your wife, Eugenie. And you're a Renaissance man. I mean, you've acted in things, you do musicals, musical shows. How would you say? Cabaret acts, correct?
Yeah. I play piano, we sing, we write shows. I will say, Maureen, I think my skill is being a writer. All the other stuff is kind of fun, and I can do it. But I might have a shot at a Pulitzer Prize. I'm not going to be at the Grammy Awards. I feel pretty confident, or the Tonys, as that goes.
Yeah, pick your lane, right? So and you were a newspaper man for a long time.
Yeah, writing has always been my thing, and I was a writer for the Tribune and the St. Petersburg Times in the day, and had a lot of success and won some big awards, and writing just felt natural, and it's always been the thing that made me the happiest, I think.
Yeah, Bob Devin Jones, when we interviewed him, interestingly enough, he considers himself as a writer. So it's always interesting because, somebody that kind of wears multiple hats. they get kind of pigeonholed somehow. But now in the time that I've known you, I've watched you move. I didn't know you as a newspaper man, and then I've watched you moved into this, writing your book and seeing that grow, and now you have another book coming out. So with all of these hats you wear, what does your typical day as a writer look like?
Because I'm the boss of the Palladium, which is helpful. I wrote this first book mostly between 9 and 10:30, 11 o'clock in coffee houses around St. Pete, and then went into the office. It's a theater, so we do a lot of night stuff.
Yeah.
So, and I'm really good as a journalist. You wrote in these crazy newsrooms where people are yelling and things are going on, and I could focus. And so I can do that pretty well. I did have to find coffee shops where I didn't know a lot of people, because the only thing that messes up your writing is when someone comes up to talk to you.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
You know exactly. I've done it to you.
Yeah. I actually, we did a segment with Keep St. Pete Lit where we were featuring coffee houses, and I specifically picked out ones for myself to write where I know I'm not going to run into 40 million people.
Right.
Because you need that quiet. So, and I always run into you too. So that's good, and it's important to show writers that you don't necessarily need long stretches. I mean, you're squeezing this in before work.
Absolutely.
And, working around your day job, and you still got a book, written. I mean, if you write a page a day, that's a 365-page book, which is the average of a novel. Is, for our book club, we read books that are about 350 pages. So that's a page a day. You can write a book a year that way.
It's not, I tell people, and I think I learned this as a piano player as well, it's putting in a little bit of time every day. You're amazed at how far it will get you.
Yeah.
And for me, writing these stories was a real joy. So I really wanted to carve out those hours. And some days it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't really write much late at night. I'm not a good night writer, but it worked out fine. And each story took about 3 months, maybe. My process is, when I'm working on a story, I start at the top of the story wherever I am and write through to the new point, and then try to push forward. So every time I'm going to a story, it's a new edit, if that makes sense. It's sort of a new draft.
Does that carry over from the newspaper days?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How has that informed your writing in other ways?
The newspaper thing?
Yeah.
Well, one, detail. So important. Research, know what you're writing about. Don't just make it up. My writing, I could always write, and I could write even if I hadn't done the research, but my writing was so much better when I knew what I was doing and when I really put the shoe leather into it. With the fiction, I didn't have to do as much research because I lived it.
Yeah.
It was really just sort of recalling and putting some framework on the stories. But you really, there's research, and knowing your subject before you sit down is the way to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are I always ask this question, what are some themes that you see yourself kind of tackling with?
It's been interesting I don't set out with a goal in mind, except maybe completing a project. I don't often even know, with these short stories, I had the story idea, I didn't have the story ending. I didn't go into it mapped out. I don't map out everything in advance, but I try to have a good solid idea. And with the novel, it's actually a novelization of a screenplay I wrote about, in LA. I started in LA about 15 years ago. And as I write through it, I realized it became a lot about income inequality in an odd way. There's a rich kid from Palm Beach, there are poor people, they're mixed. There's a lot of the backdrop of Florida, and old Florida, new Florida. So I find a lot of themes that resonate with me in my life end up in the stories without me even saying, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just sort of ends up in there, and you go, wow, well, there's my theme. I didn't realize I was going with that theme. It just sort of comes out of me to a certain extent.
Yeah, but you're allowing the space for that. Like you're allowing I just learned this new term, and probably other people have heard it, but it's new in my world. Adjacent possibilities, and how you just put, you know, things together that don't, like you said, I'm not a night writer, and I thought of like Knight-Rider the car earlier, and I immediately go, wouldn't that be interesting? Like Knight-Rider. I mean, my brain just went all these different ways. So,
and I think, Maureen, you know, you tell a good story and themes come through inadvertently, and you discover things. And so I just am not one who's, and maybe for other people it works great. I'm going to write about this. Mm-hmm. You know, I just read American Dirt, and I think, you know, she set out to write a story of the migration and make it a very human story, and it was very powerful and well told. But I don't necessarily start from that spot, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you hear characters' voices, or is it just, you know, like with your current book, it's a work of fiction, correct?
Both of them,
but you know, this is a longer form. So how did the idea for this book come about? Was it characters' voices, or was it just the topic you wanted to? Can you talk about your book at all? Or?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think back. It's funny because I wrote this. I was in LA working for the Associated Press in like 2001 and 2002. It's where I met my wife, and I was trying to be a screenwriter by, you know, in after hours, and I can't even remember why this story, where it came from. What I do know is it's set in 1981, and this is what kind of appealed to me. A couple of things happened in 1981. John Hinckley tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan to impress Jodie Foster, a movie actress. And
taxi driver. Yeah.
He's a rich kid. I don't know if you knew that story, but he was a rich kid who planned all this to impress Jodie Foster, and he'd been writing her letters and sort of stalking her. And it was also the year that Friday the 13th and all the slasher movies emerged.
Yeah.
And so somehow those two merged in my mind. So this is a romantic comedy, a coming-of-age story set in 1981 about a kid who's obsessed with a film star, and his family thinks he might want to kill him. So.
Oh my goodness, how interesting! And that's so interesting. Like those two events kind of like resonated in your mind, and this whole story kind of evolved from it. And that's the thing, like, you know, to chase it. You know, like you could have easily gone like, oh, who wants to hear about that? That's not interesting. But you were curious as a writer to kind of, you wanted to go into the story and see where it takes you.
It's just appealed to me, and it's set in Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, in the Everglades. My first job was in West Palm Beach. My brother lived on Palm Beach. I spent a lot of time roaming Florida, so a lot of it also was a setting that I knew well and felt lent itself to, you know, going from the Shishi Palm Beach into the heart of darkness in the Everglades is kind of a great journey, and this kid makes it. So it's kind of.
Will you go back to Palm Beach? Do you feel the need to do that, or are you just going to rely on?
Well, I've been a couple times.
Yeah.
I've actually been back. We planned a trip with my mom on another basis, but a whole day was spent driving around all the locations that I'm writing about and stopping and visiting and refreshing my memory. And I had done it about a year before when I just started the project. I was down there for a conference, and I did some of that as well. So, and I've got a couple of experts who are helping me with terrain and some things. Craig Pittman recommended some scientists that he knew, because I want to get the Everglades right.
Yeah. Yeah. Writing about the Everglades is tricky. You could gloss over it, and there's just so much depth, literally and figuratively, to what goes into the sea of grass.
It's been fun.
So another question would be, do you feel, because you've said you've been a writer a long time, but do you feel now that you're going into short stories and fiction that as almost like a new writer in some ways, because you're coming into a new genre? Are there things you had to learn, or did you feel like you had most of the tools in your tool belt from being a newspaper?
I honestly was terrified of writing fiction. I would have, why I didn't start writing it earlier, I think it was because I was, you know, didn't have the confidence that I could do it. I wrote some short stories over the years, and pretty much they were all fairly stinky. I think one of mine won a second place in the Creative Loafing Fiction Awards or something, but well, that was something.
Yeah.
But still, I've always felt, I read these great writers and go, that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so moved by the history of the Ybor and my recollections, and I wanted to tell that story. So I just took a chance, and honestly, I spent 2 years in fear that the book would suck.
And then win a book award.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that drives you. I think that fear of failure drives you. And so I also been very fortunate that I've got a good book group around me, and they gave feedback on most of the stories, and really a couple of times they opened doors that I wouldn't see, because there 3 of them are great female writers.
Yeah.
And
your book group.
You know who that
is. Wonderful writers and people. Yeah.
I read, wonderful people. We really miss them. We're going to try to go back to virtual book group because we haven't been able to get together.
Yeah.
But I read them a story about a female protagonist.
Mm.
And in my mind, she was heartbroken, but she had gained all this weight because she was so happy with her boyfriend and they loved eating. Well, I read them the story and they go, oh, she's totally pregnant. And I'm going, oh my God, of course she is.
Of course she is.
And it made the story. It really made the story. So having those
fascinating.
Contemporaries is really good.
It's a good point to find a good group of writers, like to read your work. I actually am finishing my 3rd book, and I'm having my housemate, who's a poet, downstairs look through it and edit, and I'm like, wow, I could just like hand it to her in my own house. But to find people that will give you constructive criticism but not derail you as a writer, because that can happen a lot. You can find people that give you, it just knocks the wind out of you, and some people never pick the pen back up. So
yeah. And you got to find people who are at your level or better.
Yeah.
And that's often the problem I found with writers groups. There were a lot of folks who aspire to be writers, and people write at every level, but it's like being a musician. You need to be playing music with people who are maybe better than you.
Yeah.
And it really helps bring up your game.
Yeah. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're
in trouble.
Room. Yeah. So what would be some advice you would give your younger writer self?
Well, one, don't be a wuss. Get out and do it. Keep trying. But I also think life turns, and I was writing. I was out.
Did I lose you?
Stuff.
Oh, there you
are. It all led me here.
Mm-hmm.
The crazy stuff. It's interesting. I was a writer with the Associated Press in LA, and my friend Pam Iorio got elected mayor of Tampa. And I wanted to come back. I thought it'd be great to come back, and usually wanted to move to the South. And I wrote to Pam, and she offered me a great job in her administration, not because of my media, but because of my Ybor City days.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. So, these crazy, I tell people, go ahead and have a misspent youth. Don't get arrested, don't get killed. But your misspent youth can come back and really pay some dividends if you're doing it right.
Yeah, and also every experience, no matter what you have done, I worked in a Jimmy Buffett store in Johns Pass and wrote during that time, but I know there's a poem that's going to come out of that you just, and the people that I met there, you just never know where life's going to lead you. And I think if you kind of look at every experience you're in, no matter what the job is or the time period, as fuel for your writing, and it will be eventually if you kind of look at it like that.
My first job in journalism, I kind of graduated from college into a recession, and all the jobs I'd been promised didn't happen. I ended up in Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, editing a sports section for a newspaper. I had never done it. They just had a job, and I knew I could do. So I never thought that wasn't my dream job, but it's come back to pay dividends because it's given me the setting and the basis for this book. So who knew?
Look at that. See, that's cool. I love hearing those kind of stories. That's really neat. So what are you reading right now, and who are some of your favorite writers?
I tell you, this shutdown has been really good for me because I was working a full-time job and doing shows at night with the Palladium and with our own. I've had time to read, and I think God bless the Tombolo folks and the Haslam folks. they've really kept me going. I am reading a book I can hardly put down right now called Deacon King Kong.
Oh, cool.
And it's, what's his name? I wrote it down, James McBride. It was excerpted in the New York Times, and it's set in 1969. I literally like it because it's set in a specific period, and they're African-American characters. He's an African-American writer, but they're also incredible Italian mobsters and incredible, he just covers the waterfront. And I really am not of this school that you can't write about people that you aren't. I mean, writers have been writing about people they aren't forever. That's what writers do. You know, questioning people's credentials because they happen to be white or they happen to be black, it's just, or whatever. You know, I just think, I understand why we have a movement to promote minority writers. I think that's absolutely amazing. But don't denigrate, you know, the poor guy who had to be, you know, who just comes out of his own life, but can write about lots of characters.
Yeah. You know? And it's also, that's the value of having good readers, you know, like you, and as you said, like, you know, writing about a female from a male perspective, it's good to have female readers can go, look, you're missing these kind of elements. But,
absolutely. But I have two editors who work on my, all my stuff. One is more a line editor, but she's a good writer as well and has done her own books. And my real word editor is, and they come back to me and say, you know, you ought to look at that. Or as a woman, I think maybe that's, so I think you need that. You need to be woke. But the fact that you can't, you know, I want to be able to write about every kind of character.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can.
Yeah.
But you need that feedback and you need to hear from people.
Yeah, agreed. So if you, where do you go for inspiration? Like if you get blocked, or do you get writer's block, or? He's like, no.
You sit down, I only want to do projects that I love. And so far since I started this, you know, it's just kind of flowed. And I'm starting a new project based on an old screenplay that I sort of structured out. And that was based on an old newspaper story. So I'm ready to go, you know, and it's like, okay, let's go. Let's get this other two projects out of the way because I like to focus.
Yeah.
So far it's been fine.
I like that you said, like, you know, write what you love. You know, like you're actually, you wanna be in the story. You want to be writing the story. You want to be telling the story. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's not hard. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not, you know, you have parts in the story that are a bit, you know, you have to really get through. Yeah, but you want to write the story, and I think that's important to realize. Like, I mean, even with poetry, like my writing process has recently just changed, which is fascinating, and I'm actually I'm just writing down thoughts for poems, and then I'll allow the poem, that idea to gestate, and I have like 6 or 7 ideas right now, like, instead of just focusing on one poem or waiting for inspiration or all these things. But it's also like, I'm going to go to the poem that resonates with me right now. And then I want to follow that path and have that adventure.
And don't write with the end in mind, the end being, you know, standing in front of an audience, reading it, or your book getting published. Yeah. You know, I wrote from the passion of wanting to tell these stories, and that leads to good stuff, or it leads nowhere, who knows. But you know, it's, for me, the path has been, you know, really good. I think my only goal was to be invited to the Times Festival of Reading.
I know.
You know, and that happened, so I'm satisfied.
Yeah, I'm reading this book right now that Poets and Writers just put out. It's like the complete guide for writers. I'm immersed in it, but it talks about, like, what are your educational goals? What are your financial goals? What are your publishing goals? What are your, you know, your higher goals as a writer? And it's like, I go, did I really ever think about these things? You know, like, to me, it's like, if my book's on a bookshelf, even just locally, and, you know, I can, people read it and one person is touched by it, I'm happy. So it's important to, you know, and as you said, like, you wrote the last book and you were terrified to put it out there, but then, you know, it happens to win an award. And how you could have gotten stuck on being terrified and never have written this. And you're the only person that's going to write this book. Like no one else is going to write it how you write it. So if you don't write it, it's not going to get written. And that's really important to realize.
I do remember handing the first copy over to Colette Bancroft at your event. I think it was at the Keepsake, your kickoff of your festival about 2 years ago.
Festival. Yeah.
And I was a little bit shaky when I did it because that was going to be she was actually going to read it and review it.
Oh, wow.
So, anyway, she liked it.
Big old review in the Tampa Bay Times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one last question. What would be your holy grail of writing advice for writers?
I think some of it we shared already. It's just, write about things you're passionate about. Don't write with the end in mind. Find your characters and let them speak to you. That sounds like a cliche, but all these characters ended up opening up to me in ways that I never expected. And I ended up loving them, even the ones that weren't so lovable.
Yeah.
And I look back on them and I go, where did that come from? I didn't set out that way.
Yeah.
And it's just when you hand yourself over to that process, holy magic happens somehow. And it's that whole thing about being the vessel. I mean, that's a cliche too, but I look at the page and I said, who wrote that? Oh, I guess it was me.
Yeah.
And I'm not bragging. It's just that.
Oh, I get it. I totally understand.
Stuff happens.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why this is the coolest thing you could possibly do. I think being a writer is like the ultimate calling.
And I think also, finally keep your day job, because it makes writing so much easier when you're not worried about, do I have to sell it? I like the fact that this was a labor of love for me, and I wasn't trying to put food on the table with this. It may lead to that at some point where this novel could go somewhere, but that's not my goal. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good advice though to be practical. So you can, if you have the practical side covered, then you can go into the magical creative space without the looming electric and rent and gas bill hanging over your head. And
my wife finds me very attractive because I have a job.
That's funny. Okay, so you've got something to share with us.
I do have a little bit of excerpt from this book. And
does it have a title, or is that it?
Yeah, it's got a title. It's titled.
Exciting.
The book is called Trickle Down. Set in the 80s. Reagan was famous for having trickle down economics, that if something good happens for the rich people, it's going to happen for the poor people too. Yeah. We've proven over the years that that's not necessarily the case, but anyway, that title has a lot of other meanings. After I write the story, it ended up with more meanings. Just to set this up, my protagonist is 17 years old. His name is Michael Donnelly. He's a rich kid from Palm Beach who's lost his mother to suicide, and he's become obsessed with a slasher movie queen named Dawn Karsten. And she's making a movie in the Everglades. And,
I love this.
And called Swamp Fiend. And
I love this. Yeah.
It's a good movie. And his family thinks he really wants to kill her. He really wants to make movies, better movies for her. He thinks she ought to be in a better movie. Anyway, so he goes on the lam instead of going into a mental hospital. And when this scene picks up, he's just fled his house and he's checking into a sleazy motel.
Did we lose you?
In West Palm Beach. Okay. And am I still there?
You're there. You just freeze for a moment. And yeah, go ahead.
The internet in these old houses is a little shaky. Anyway, he's just checked into a sleazy roadside motel. That's a place I stayed, actually, my first night in West Palm Beach. So, and he meets a character who will be with him through the whole book. All right. The Blue Marlin was a 2-story Spanish-style motel with a barrel tile roof, though a lot of the tiles were missing, exposing a tar paper underneath, giving the roof the look of a peach and black chessboard. Michael's ground floor room opened onto the asphalt parking lot. the sidewalk shaded by the overhanging sidewalk of a second story of identical rooms. Michael was alone in the parking lot, struggling to get the plastic fish out of his pocket when the door of the adjoining room opened. Pardon me, but would you have any Scotch tape handy? The male voice was deep and resonant. Michael looked over and watched a tall man emerge, his hair gray and flowing back from his forehead, his eyes set deep above a hawk's nose. He could have been an aging film star, except for the skinny legs and fuzzy slippered feet visible beneath a blue terry cloth robe pocked with dozens of blackened cigarette burns. The man was holding a pack of cigarettes in one hand and a thick roll of gray masking tape in the other. He waved the tape at Michael. This really won't do. It's too concealing. What are you trying to do? The man smiled, showing off some marvelous molars, marred only by a single missing incisor. Planting bait, my boy, planting bait. What's the good of bait if your prey can't see it? Comprende? I don't have any Scotch tape, Michael said. Oh, well, we'll make do then. Can you give me a hand? He pressed the pack of Marlboro 100s about midway up the wide window of his room. If you could just hold this right here. Michael hesitated. The man turned and stared. Now, if you don't mind. Michael set his backpack down next to his suitcase and stepped over to the window. He held the cigarette pack with 2 fingers, leaving room for the man to apply narrow strips of masking tape he had cut with his teeth. Michael eased his fingers off once the tape was in place. The man stepped back to admire the job. There, that will have to do for now. Why are you putting cigarettes on the window? When you want to lure a woman, my boy, you have to figure out what they really crave. Jewels, flowers, food, sex. Among other things, Lola really craves Marlboro 100s. I put a pack in the window and she knows I still love her and all is forgiven. Is Lola your wife? Michael asked. I'm talking about love here, not indentured servitude. Lola and I are real lovers. What we have is passionate and volatile. D.H. Lawrence love, Madame Bovary love, epic, heartbreaking, face down dead in the snow love, sexy and tragic, the way God intended love to be. Oh, Michael wasn't sure what the proper response should be. Have you ever been in love? No, maybe. I mean, I think so. The image of Dawn coming out of the shower in sorority house slasher flashed in his mind. And what's her name? The man asked, setting the tape down on the windowsill and pulling a cigarette out of his own pack. Dawn, Michael said. Oh, lovely moniker. And what does she crave? Images of Dawn taking her final bloody bow in a dozen cheap slasher flicks ran like a highlight reel across the movie screen in Michael's mind. Death, I think. She really seems to love death. The man smiled and lit the cigarette with a chrome Zippo. He inhaled and let the words flow out with the smoke. Ah, swooning in sickbeds, dark night of the soul stuff. The orgasm is a little glimpse of death, don't you think? That magical moment when we come unshackled from the tentacles of this mundane life and soar. He looked at Michael. Am I right? Sure, Michael said, though he was far from sure. Is she good in bed? What? Dawn, how is she in the sack? Michael looked around the parking lot, not sure how to answer. He was wishing Danny was still around. He'd know what to say. I don't really... The man cut him off. Ah, unrequited love. Almost the best kind, but hard on the sheets. A man alone must take matters into his own hands, as they say. So, staying long? Just a day or so, Michael said, happy to move on to other topics. I'm heading out to meet her. I'm just working on the details. Ah, just give me a minute. The man disappeared into his room. A few seconds later, he was back. If you indeed snare your lady love, you'll need a few of these. He underhanded a small foil packet in Michael's direction. Michael tried to catch the flying packet, but missed. When he bent to pick it up, he could see the small square had a brand name, Trojan. Michael looked closely, turning it in his hand. That part in the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. It's an advertising slogan for a product you can never return. You can't get your money back and there's no allowance for buyer's remorse. Listen carefully now. That thin plastic membrane is all that stands between you and a life sentence without parole. The name is Riley, Kavanaugh Riley. You free later for dinner?
Oh, I love your voices. And I love your sense of humor. That was
hopefully a funny book.
Kavanaugh Riley.
Kavanaugh Riley, the third.
And he just, oh my God, like just the contrast of the two characters. And oh, I love it. She loves death. Paul, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
We'll do this in person. I miss you, Maureen. So soon, hopefully.
Soon. We won't just have to do Zoom. That rhymes, right? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for episode 8 with Paul Wilborn of Typewriter Talks. We are Keep St. Pete Lit. You can find information about us at keepstpetelit.org. We have writing classes, online book clubs right now, poetry and writing gym meetups where you can workshop your work. Lots of options for you if you're a writer, even if you don't live in the Tampa Bay area. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you back next week with episode 9. And thank you, Paul.